you're not familiar with the story, as the video mentioned, it is a mystery, but it's a little bit more in the film noir kind of mode. And then Paul Schiller is going to give you some details and background on William Gillette, his life, his career, and things like that. So we appreciate you coming out today on this beautiful weather. I hope you take time to walk around the grounds. The friends have been really refurbishing all the gardens and things. Visit the inside of the castle, get a real good insight onto the mind of William Gillette. And yeah, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Derrick, and he's going to give you our first topic of discussion. Thank you.
All right. I'm old school, so I do still have a printed out paper to read. I just want to start by thanking you all for being here on this momentous occasion. As you heard, my name is Derrick Belanger. I'm a publisher and co-owner of Belanger Books. I'm also a member of the Baker Street Irregulars, which is the oldest Sherlock Holmes society in the world. And each year in January, we hold a dinner at the Yale Club in New York City, which is called the Sherlock Holmes Dinner. And earlier that day is the Gillette luncheon. So I don't know what that film was talking about, saying Gillette's not remembered, because he's very much remembered in the Sherlock Holmes community. Also, there are Sherlock Holmes societies throughout America. There are Sherlock Holmes societies throughout the world. We get together regularly, discuss Sherlock Holmes stories, listen to talks like this. If you're interested in joining one, you can talk to me at the end, because I can get you in touch with people who can tell you no matter where you live, there's probably a Sherlock Holmes group near you. For example, I'm actually living close to Denver, Colorado. I'm the president of Dr. Watson's Life for Patients, which is the Denver Sherlock Holmes Society. So, just so you know, and I know there's at least two near here in Connecticut. But let me turn to why we're here today. Okay? At last, William Gillette's 1927 book, the lost masterpiece, The Astounding Crime on Torrington Road, is back in print. Okay. And getting this book into print was quite the feat. It was a few years ago that Tony Lynn, Friends of Gillette Castle, part of the Friends of Gillette Castle State Park, told Brian and I that the one book that they keep on getting requests for is Torrington Road. Okay, like there is just no editions of this out there. And would we please consider publishing a new one? Okay, she didn't literally twist her arms, but she came pretty close to get us to create this new edition. And we took the plunge. Bringing the book back that has only existed in one edition from 1927, hardcover, wasn't easy. First, we had to get a copy of the original book, which is not that cheap. Okay, in fact, it's actually difficult to get one that's in very good shape. Okay, but that was okay. We ended up getting a copy of the hardcover. Then I had to digitize the book, which even with a book scanner, which is what I use, I had to go page by page and scan the entire book. And as good as technology is, and we've got a really good book scanner, it's still not 100% great. So for some reason, the book scanner is reading the letter I as an exclamation mark occasionally. Or page numbers that just decided to put them in the middle of new pages. So it took me about a year to clean the text up, to go over and over, to reread the book several times, to make sure the edition was good. Okay? And I'm happy to say we did it. It looks pretty much cover and all like it did in the original edition that Gillette released. So, very proud of that. Okay? And I think you're going to be happy with the results of it. Now I'm going to pause for a little bit. Let me talk about the book itself. Okay? And I have to be honest, to talk about this book, I'm going to go back in time 25 years. Because at that time, for the first time ever, I saw the film Double Indemnity, which some of you probably have seen. It's considered a masterpiece. I wanted to see it because it was in the 100, like at the time it was late 90s. Considered one of the best movies of all time. It was on the top 100 movie list from the AFI. And I saw the film, and it's brilliant. If you've never seen it, it's a really brilliant film. But it does take a little bit to get into. It starts out with a man with a gunshot wound going to a reporter, and then the entire movie's a flashback. So that alone is kind of like, what the heck? Okay, you don't usually see that. And on top of that, the dialogue is like book dialogue. It's not like spoken dialogue. And so that took a little bit of getting used to as well. And it really felt like watching a hard-boiled detective novel. So I brought that up because I had a very similar reaction reading this book. Okay? I've read it about as many times as I've seen Double Indemnity now. Probably read it more. And every time I read it, I find it more ingenious what Mr. Gillette did. Okay? This book also begins with a flashback of sorts with two newsmen discussing an event one saw on Torrington Road. And then a third man joining them, telling them, hey, I heard you guys mention Torrington Road, I've got a story to share. And then so we got a flashback followed by another flashback. It's like layers and layers of flashback. Okay? So like Double Indemnity, the narrative structure, the phrasing of words in particular, it hits you with a surprise left. Okay? And when you're down for the count, you get up off the mat, and it hits you again. It's a really cool book, and I'd argue it's one of the greatest noir books of all time. And I'd also argue probably one of the top 100 mysteries of the 20th century. And it's a crime that it was just not, that it was forgotten. And that's a tragedy. So, like any of Gillette's work, we can't help but connect it to Sherlock Holmes. You gotta connect it there, okay? And this one, the great detective, whose image we now know, a lot of you guys probably know, is the Deerstalker hat, the Inverness cape, the calabash pipe. That was all invented by Gillette. Okay, that was not in any of the Holmes stories. He is the reason that we have this image of Holmes that we have today. And this book isn't structured the least bit like a Sherlock Holmes novel. I'll let you know that, okay? There's no Watson character recounting the story, but it's still an incredible mystery. And there is something that Sir Arthur would have really appreciated. This book, and especially the last third, dives into the world of spiritualism. And as a lot of you probably know from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, was a big believer in spiritualism. Okay, mainly after his son died in World War I, in particular, but throughout his life, he really connected to the world of spiritualism, and that's a big part of this. So I'm not going to spoil anything in the book. No spoilers in this talk, and I don't want you to detract from the text. Okay. I'm really hoping, and I'm so happy to hear that the hardcover edition here is already almost sold out. We just brought it today, so that's incredible. That's really good. Because really, I hope that with this new edition, Gillette's work thrives. It finds the audience it deserves, and it keeps just growing. I want to thank the Friends of Gillette Castle State Park for their work in this, and for keeping this beautiful, beautiful castle alive. Okay. Also want to thank Brian, who's going to talk next. He'll read some of the book to us, and Paul Schiller our Gillette expert, as I like to call him, for giving the talk a little bit about Gillette. You'll hear more about him as well. Also, just a couple of other kindest regards to the Kelly Schiller of the Cherish the Moment Photography, okay, for allowing us to use some of the pictures of the castle in the new edition of the book, and for facsimile dust jackets, which actually had the original, like they had redone the original dust jacket of the book and allowed us to use it. So this is the original 1927 book jacket, and that's really cool. And of course, we have to thank William Gillette for writing this masterpiece. And again, I really hope everybody here enjoys it. Thank you all for coming. It really was a labor of love putting this together, and I thank you all for being here. So thank you.
Thank you, Derrick. That was really interesting. I had never seen a copy of the dust cover for this book. I have 2 copies of it. I am always watching for new copies since it is hard to get a hold of, and I had never seen it. So when they told me they were able to find the original artwork, I was just thrilled. I'm excited now that Brian is going to do some readings from the text itself, and I'm a new art fan as well, so I'm excited for this. Thank you.
The problem with this was I didn't want to give out any spoilers. I mean, it's been out 100 years, but so I'm choosing something from towards the beginning, describing one of the many villains of this piece. This, many of you guys are fans of Eddie Muller and Turner Classic Movies. This is just like the best film noir, but. I've been speaking of this man as Mr. Pentecost, but that wasn't his name at the time in Chicago. On the door of his musty little office, a bit of modest black lettering announced the occupant as Max Spellman, attorney at law. This Spellman, later Pentecost, had been plugging along in the law game out there for something like 2 years before he attracted attention. Then it began to be noticed in what is referred to as the underworld, that a young attorney in the Ashland block seemed to be having extraordinary success in the cases of a number of small caliber crooks for whose defense he'd been engaged or appointed. The court named him the first time in a petty larceny case where the accused was unable to get counsel. It was the ingenuity of this fellow's tactics that first made him talked about, and a couple of instances of his lightning quickness and audacity went the rounds of crookdom.
Speak up, please.
This underworld comment, This underworld comment was hardly more than beginning when one of the high-up operators, a super crook, you might say, who had been rounded up after a 6-month hunt, got Spellman to defend him, and from that time he was in the middle of the map. The upper world now began to take notice, and inquiries regarding the man flew about, but found nothing to light on. More business than he could handle came in, and, with hardly an exception, from below. Of course, he didn't get verdicts for his clients every time, but his average was amazing. There was always a surprise in some quick turn he'd make, some entirely unexpected stroke, the finding of new and vital evidence, and the throwing it at them just when it would knock them silly. He'd get at them this way nearly every time, and of course there was a rush to find a flaw, but there wasn't a screw or a bolt missing. Don't get the idea that he was in the least spectacular. Nothing of the kind. No oratory, no impassioned pleading, no any of those fancy things you read about. He'd sit hunched up like a toad in court, solemn, motionless, never speaking unless necessary, and then in a voice so low that spectators, if there were any, found it difficult to hear. But, again like a toad, he struck with lightning quickness when the time came. To witnesses for the prosecution, he was a scourge and a terror. His gentle questioning, his weary manner, and sleepily drooping eyelids nursed his victims into unguarded confidence. And then came the lightning out of a clear sky, striking upon the least contradiction on this statement. His very appearance at such times, the backward slant of his forehead, the sudden scorching fire of unusually somnolent eyes, confused and disconcerted. When underworld business came in on him with a rush, he began to be careful about what cases he took. Not as to the guilt or innocence of the applicant, but in order to pick out what he had a sporting chance to win. The possibilities of what extraordinary and ingenious defense he could accomplish, and sometimes not only approaching the danger line, but frequently going a considerable distance on the other side of it, would flash through his mind almost automatically as he made his first hasty examination of the case upon the character and attractiveness, for he greatly enjoyed this phase of the game. Of these possibilities would depend his going into the defense. After Spellman really got going, there wasn't much of anything in his line he wouldn't do. All the tricks and political pulls were as lowercase ABC to him, not to speak of the intimate personal records of lawyers, judges, and police officials who were likely to come within his sphere of action. His sphere doesn't sound precisely right, but you know what I mean. He had an extensive collection of the weak spots, the vulnerable regions, you might say, everywhere, and saw in an instant how to play them in any given case. Through some sharp move or thread in the right direction, or by dropping a bit of money where he knew it would be picked up, he'd be about 90% sure to get his man out of the mess. One day, to give you an instance, the assistant cashier of a Chicago bank of fairly decent standing was shown into Spellman's office and told him, after some beating about, that he was shying his account by some $250,000. The man, whose name was Chatfield, gave out the well-known tale about playing the stock market. All gone? Spellman inquired, without bothering to pull up his drooping eyelids. Why, I think not quite. Damn thing! You know what you've got. Yes, $16,000. I was keeping it to get away on. They'll be on to you soon, of course, so you wouldn't be here. There's barely 2 days. My God, barely 2. Chatfield glanced around in a kind of agony. And he swallowed with difficulty. The examiner might get here sooner, but we can never be sure. You've got the remnant with you, I see. Chatfield nodded, and his eyes moved painfully about in a way that made me think they'd fill up with tears in a minute. You want me to handle this affair, I take it? Oh, I hoped you would. That's right. Pass me the $16,000. The terrified cashier handed Spellman a large, fat envelope, which the latter opened in a weary sort of way. Having pulled the bunch of bills out a little way, picked their ends as he might a pack of cards before the shuffle. Then he looked glassily at the assistant cashier for a full minute. Can you steal another 100,000? Why, I don't, you don't mean, can you steal another 100,000 with no change in inflection? Why, yes, I could, but it would take you long? Long? Oh, yes, well, quite a while. I should say several hours. 2 o'clock is several hours. Come here with it then. Mr. Spellman, I can do it. Yes, I can, you know, but they're trying to find out inside of 24 hours the way I've got to get it this time. I don't care how you get it. I wanted it too. Of course, it didn't happen as quick as that. I'm only giving you the high spots. When Chatfield came back at 2 with the money, Spellman put it in his safe where the 16 was already reposing. Then he phoned the bank and got an appointment. Inside of half an hour, he was seated in the private office of the president and was conveying to him alone, having satisfied himself that no witnesses were within hearing distance, the information that he had a client, Henry Parsons Chatfield by name, who claimed to be the bank's assistant cashier, and that, unless the man was lying, they'd find his accounts a matter of $350,000 short. He had strongly urged Mr. Chatfield, instead of trying to escape with the $100,000 or so that he still had in his possession after dumping the rest into Wall Street, to return to the bank and make a confession. This he found Chatfield willing to do, provided he could be safeguarded against arrest or legal action of any description. He, Spellman, wasn't presuming to advise the acceptance of such a proposition. It seemed to be only a question of whether the bank wished the money or preferred to prosecute. The latter in case, Chatfield could be apprehended. Every time the bank president broke out on him, which of course he did with all the force at his command, the lawyer cut him short. I must say, sir, this is a most extraordinary, a most outrageous. Do you want it? Are you aware, Mr. Spellman, of your own risk? Do you want it? We shall certainly take steps to. Do you want it? But of course, Spellman knew they did. Knew they'd have to have it, or he wouldn't have been there. Moreover, he noticed that the president made no move to ring the bell and call in other officials of the bank. The document he had ready was duly signed and executed. It wasn't until after that was done and the thing securely in his possession that he paid over the $100,000 to the bank. He returned 6 of the 16 in his safe to Chatfield, and with it a biting comment on the assistant cashier's consummate asininity. The remaining $10,000 continued to remain. Well, okay. I'm going to try to do this spoiler-free. But I'm going to read you a little bit of a police. What?
Can you turn off the fan because you're having to speak over all this?
It's the air conditioning.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think you're going to have any problem hearing over this. This is, I'm going to try to keep names out of this and so forth, but this is towards the end where a certain suspect is being interrogated by the Boston police and about a certain crime. That same morning, about 11 o'clock, the man was nearing the point of breakdown that the police were working him for. The gang that took him on at noon, the police worked in shifts, had it in for him. Even then, the pitiable wretch was trying to answer as best he could, but he found it difficult to remember anything at all, or even to understand what his persecutors were talking about. Furthermore, his voice was nearly gone, and his tongue so swollen and dry that he couldn't speak with any sort of distinctness. You say you ran out of the house before the murder was committed. That's what you say, is it? Answer! What's the matter with you? Answer the question! Answer the question! The man tried to say yes, but he could hardly move his lips. It must have been the 868th time they'd asked him. Now go on and tell us why you run out. Why? Why? What was it started you out? Was you sick? What'd you run out? Punch him, Lucas. What'd you run out for? What'd you run out for? I thought. His dry mouth and swollen tongue made it almost impossible to form words. Go on. Go on. Go on. What did you think? Something terrible going to happen? How in hell's name could you know something was going to happen unless you was going to make it happen? It did happen, by God, and it was you made it happen, and then you ran out of the house so you could frame somebody else for it. No. With much difficulty and shaking of his head. What was it then? What was it? What made you run out? Noises. The man's tongue seemed to get in his way. What kind of noise? Punch him again, Lucas. What noises? Noises. Someone lights out, scared. Ran for the police. Oh, police? You ran for the police? The man nodded and his bloodshot eyes rolled heavily from one to another of his burly questioners. Did you have to take a ladder with you to find him? Ladder? Don't try any funny business with us. We know what you did. We know you had a ladder with you. Now what about the ladder, huh? What about it? Oh, the ladder. off as his head fell forward in sleep. Punch him up, Lucas. Aye. Keep him on the job, can't you? Listen here. That ladder was open for the blinds, eh? So what did you want him open for, huh? Tell me that. Tell me that. Yes. With a great effort to keep awake. Always, the man left his blinds open. Always. Then what the hell was they shut for if he liked them? What was they shut for? Punch him up, Lucas. Put a ticket for him. Now answer the question. What was they shut for? The man struggled to remember, but finally shook his head. Now I will ask you something. What about the money? You wouldn't answer last night, but we were asking him again. But now we got it on you. You saw there was money in that place, what? You saw it, I said. You saw a big pile of bills on the table, huh? Why didn't you answer? I'll tell you why. You're afraid to tell. No, not afraid. He's not afraid. I saw it, yes. What was you doing sneaking around, spying on them like that when they had money inside? Why didn't you stay in the kitchen where you belong? Every detective in the room was now roaring with laughter. The man who'd been questioning suddenly turned on the man. Where did you trick the money? When did I? You got it. Don't suppose we know you got it. Now when? When did you trick the money? I promised not to. What did you promise, eh? Not to say anything. Who did you promise it to? Mrs. Langford. How did that happen? He handed money to you. Oh, he handed money to you. He handed it to you, did he? Made a little present of $35,000 to you, I suppose. The man tried to speak but couldn't manage. What did you do with it? Again, the man couldn't get the words out. It would take so many to explain everything. I'll tell you what you did with it. You put it in the barn behind a loose stone. Did you deny that? No. Oh, don't deny it. You did it. You stole the money from Charles Howard, and then, by God, you hid it in the wall of that barn. Did you confess you hid it there? He told me to put it in a safe place. So, now you got it out. Now, by God, we got your story, and a pretty one it is. What you've just told us is just the same as a confession. You shot the man yourself. Yes, by God, you just as good as said it. Now, the way it stands, your one chance is to spit out the truth in plain words. The truth is, you shot the man yourself. You hid the money yourself, and you went out and opened the shutters yourself so people would think a man outside done the shooting. Put that in plain words and sign it, and you got a chance. You got a chance of mercy from the court if you confess. Sign here. Right under here, see? Pushing the paper under his eyes, while another man seized the pen and dipped it in nearby ink. Sign here, on that line. It's the only thing that will save you. And if you want to know the rest.
That was great. Another just quick point I wanted to point out when you're reading it. All of the text and the punctuation, grammar, none of that was cleaned up or updated or anything. So if you do come across anything, you kind of raise your eyes, say, isn't that supposed to be? Shouldn't that have been? This is exactly true the way it was originally. So I just wanted to point that little interesting thing out to you, because a lot of times too, when somebody does bring something back into the public, they will clean it up or whatever, and especially because of the historical place that I think this has in not only the mystery history, Sherlock history, Gillette's life, it is true. So just wanted to share that. And our last presentation is Paul Schiller. So Paul Schiller is a Gillette expert. Gillette expert, yes. He worked at the castle for many years. He has extreme knowledge and historical knowledge of his entire lifespan and everything. Paul did write the introduction to the book. And I just want to also mention that if anybody does have a copy or purchased a copy today, all three of the gentlemen will be here, and they're available to sign should you want that. Paul just finished doing a lecture up at the Mark Twain House on Gillette. If you got a chance to see that, it was fantastic. I think you can
So, good afternoon. My name is Paul Schiller. For those of you who don't know me, I spent almost a decade working at this beautiful park. I got to show people around what I lovingly refer to as my castle, talking about all of its history, pointing out the quirks and eccentricities, and telling stories about William Gillette, some of which could possibly be true. I also manage the Castle Archives, did intensive research and educational programming here at the park. I was honored to be asked to provide an introduction for the republished version of Astounding Crime on Torrington Road. So today I'm going to provide some insight on William Gillette, who he was, provide some context about his life, and what it was like when he was writing the novel. If you watched the background video, that gave you some stuff, and you got some good background also from Derrick, but hopefully you'll learn even more. Please bear with me, I tend to make a short story long. My typical lecture is like an hour and a half. So I'm gonna try to boil this down to keep to the allotted 20 minutes. If I'm talking too fast, feel free to interrupt me, heckle me, whatever you have to do, that's fine, I have no problem with that. Also, I have to do a quick legal notice, just a disclaimer. As I alluded to, I no longer actually work here, and I currently hold a different position with another state agency. So that said, I'm here as a private citizen, as a subject matter expert. Any thoughts and opinions are my own. They are not reflective, nor am I speaking here for Connecticut State Park, STEEP, or the state of Connecticut. I'm literally just here for the fun of it. So anyway, let's just get down to business. So if you think that William Gillette was behind the invention of the safety razor, get out. You should already know by now. So William Gillette was an actor, director, playwright. He basically did everything in the theater, and he was phenomenally good at it. You can consider him the George Clooney of the late 1800s. If you were a living, breathing person anywhere in the Western world at the turn of the century, you knew who William Gillette was. So I'm going to actually rewind, start my story at the very beginning here. So William Gillette was born in Hartford, 1853. His father, Francis, was a Yale-educated lawyer, farmer, businessman. He held several positions in state government, and the year that Will was born, his father was appointed to a 2-year fill-in term as a U.S. Senator. Now, his mother was Elizabeth Daggett Hooker. She was a direct descendant of the Reverend Thomas Hooker. He settled in Hartford in the 1630s and is considered to be the father of Connecticut. So both sides of Will's family were in the area over 200 years before he was even born. Now, in 1853, Francis Gillette and his brother-in-law, John Hooker, bought 140 acres of land in the Asylum Hill area of Hartford, selling to all their friends who wanted to build their estates there. It became known as the Nook Farm neighborhood. It was the intellectual and cultural powerhouse of the country during the mid-19th century. So among their neighbors were Charles Dudley Warner, Harry Beecher Stowe, and Mark Twain. Now Mark Twain moved into the neighborhood while Will was in high school. They grew to become good friends. Now Will's first paid role on stage was a play called The Gilded Age, based on the book that Twain wrote with Charles Dudley Warner. Twain actually recommended him for the part. Now, initially it was a non-speaking role, and then an actor dropped out, and Gillette was able to get 2 whole lines in the entire play. Twain actually meant the recommendation as a joke. He didn't think Gillette was going to be a serious actor. He actually was later quoted as saying, "I don't know which I like better, having Gillette make a tremendous success or seeing one of my jokes go wrong." Now, Will became a stock actor. He was working steadily through the 1870s, traveling across the Northeast, the Midwest, the Gulf Coast. His first major success in the theater came in 1881 with a play called Professor, which Twain helped him to finance. It was followed later that year with Esmeralda, an adapted play which Gillette wrote, but he did not act in. And then he followed that up in 1884 with a play called The Private Secretary. Over the course of the next 15 years, he wrote and starred in another 11 plays, reaching international success. In 1886 and 1895 respectively, he came out with 2 Civil War spy dramas, Held by the Enemy and Secret Service, which received international acclaim. The most endearing quality was that with these plays being produced just a few decades after the end of the Civil War, both sides were portrayed in a very fair and humane light. So that meant that they were able to have commercial success in the North and the South and the West and in Europe and other places. In fact, Secret Service went on to become Gillette's most popular production. He put on that show 1,700 times. Now, he was an actor and playwright who excelled in drama and comedy. His acting range was somewhat limited, though. He's that strong, silent type that was calm in the face of chaos, so you might compare him to like a Clint Eastwood or John Wayne. But he knew that, and he wrote plays where the lead character mirrored what his strengths were. So he was able to also sort of transition acting to an area where instead of the actors being extremely over-exaggerated and dramatic, he was very subtle. He could capture an audience with just a simple gesture or glance. And he was financially successful because he realized that by acting, directing, and writing, all the money came back to him. He was among the highest paid actors in the world at that time. At his peak, Gillette was taking home $200,000 to $300,000 a year. And grand total over the course of his career, he made about $4 million. So he did okay for himself. So let's get to talking about the only character people actually care about, Sherlock Holmes. Of course, it was Arthur Conan Doyle who wrote the Sherlock Holmes novel, so of course Doyle created the character in the stories. Doyle actually tried to write a play adaptation of his own books. He shopped it around to a few different British actors, but he couldn't find anyone willing to perform. Either they didn't want to do it all, or they wanted to make too many changes, and Doyle wasn't willing to do that. Eventually, he got in contact with Charles Frohman, who was Gillette's manager. Frohman recommended that Gillette do the part. So Gillette accepted as long as he could make certain changes that he wanted to make in rewriting the play, and Doyle was okay with that. He actually, Gillette sent a telegram to Doyle asking if he could marry Sherlock Holmes off, which is something sort of unheard of. Sherlock Holmes wasn't really supposed to fall in love in the stories. But Doyle's response is, you may marry him, murder him, or do what you like with him. At that point, Doyle didn't care. He wanted people to take his other works more seriously, but he needed money so he could build his new estate, and the quickest way to do that was to do a play adaptation of Sherlock Holmes. So Gillette took pieces of 4 of the stories, added in his own characters, his own plot lines. In the spring of 1899, Gillette traveled to England to meet with Doyle. Now the legend is Gillette got off the train, he was in full costume. He walked up to Doyle with a magnifying glass, said something along the lines of, unquestionably an author. That sort of got a chuckle, broke the ice, and he secured approval to put on the play. Gillette debuted as Sherlock Holmes at the Star Theater in Buffalo, October 30th, 1899. And then from there, he went on to perform that role over 1,300 times over the course of 33 years. Now, more importantly, as Derrick was alluding to, he gave us a portrayal of Sherlock Holmes, and he popularized it. So, for example, the deerstalker cap was never actually written about in the novels. It was hinted at by the illustrators of the pageant, but Gillette is sort of the one that brought that to life and popularized it. Originally, Sherlock Holmes had a straight pipe, but Gillette didn't think that it was easy to hold when performing lines, so he went with the curved pipe. Sherlock Holmes initially had a pocket lens, which is too small to see if you're an audience member, so Gillette made it a magnifying glass just out of practicality and probably because it's more dramatic. The phrase elementary, my dear Watson, is probably one of the most well-known phrases in our popular culture. It was never actually in the novels. Elementary was in the novels, my dear Watson was there, but they were nowhere near each other. Gillette started saying the phrase, elementary, my dear fellow, and then over time that's what evolved into elementary, my dear Watson. He also gave us a classic profile and portrayal of Sherlock Holmes. So every actor who came after Gillette to portray Sherlock Holmes had to make sure they were fitting his profile, his image, because Gillette's the Sherlock Holmes that the public knew. Orson Welles once said, it's too little to say William Gillette resembles Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes looks exactly like William Gillette. Now, Gillette's career was predominantly on stage. He did one radio play in 1930. The only film he ever did was his silent movie of Sherlock Holmes, which he did in 1916. It was lost forever until it wasn't anymore, because then they found it about 10 years ago in France. They restored it and re-released it. You can see, you'll probably available in the souvenir shop. You see a display case over there, some photos that talk a little bit about the movie and the re-release, the American debut of the movie back in 2015. I gave you some background on his career, so let's change gears, talk a little bit about his personal life. During the performance of The Professor, Gillette saw a young actress from Detroit named Helen Nichols in the audience. As I say, it was love at first sight, and they immediately began courting. They were married in the summer of 1882, and then from there, she gave up her career in the theater to travel with Will as he was performing. Now, sadly, in 1888, she died from a ruptured appendix. Helen was 28 years old at the time. Now, the legend has it is that when she was on her deathbed, Will promised her he never remarried. Is the story true? I don't know. Sounds nice. Either way, he outlived her by 49 years. He was single the entire time. He never had children. Now, after her death, he took a 5-year break from his acting career. He was still writing plays, but he didn't act for 5 years. He eventually made his way to Tryon, North Carolina, where he bought almost 700 acres of land, bought himself a little mountaintop bungalow, and he called it 1,000 Pines. That would be his private retreat until he sold it in the 1920s. Now, there's a local legend that one day while walking around in Tryon, Will suddenly collapsed. A woman by the name of Mary Polly Cruff, known locally as Aunt Polly, nursed him back to health. Now, again, is it true? It's a good story. He at least knew her. They were real people. They probably had association. I can't tell you more beyond that. Now, aside from Gillette's family house in Hartford and Thousand Pines, he preferred living in large, slow-moving, and hilariously awkward houseboats. The first of which was called the Holy Terror, the second of which was named the Aunt Polly. Now, William Gillette had actually planned to build a retirement home in Long Island. He had purchased land in East Marion, New York, and started amassing materials there. Now, the story is that in the summer of 1913, Gillette sailed up the Connecticut River on the Aunt Polly. He saw a chain of hills known locally as the Seven Sisters. Intrigued by the area, he docked by the Chester Hadline Ferry, hiked up the top of the southernmost hill, and fell in love with the property and was soon able to acquire 122 acres. That's how the story goes. I can bust that one though, because in reality, Gillette was familiar with this area from cruising the Connecticut River. His niece spent her summers in East Haddam. There were rumors as early as 1907 he was going to settle either at Deep River or in Haddam, and he started buying up the land for the castle in 1908. Now, the castle was meant as Gillette's retirement home, not that he ever really retired. His last performance as Sherlock Holmes was 1932, so he would have been about 79 at that point. His last stage performance was 1936, so he would have been roughly 82, almost 83 at that point. So he kept on going, but he did spend a fair amount of time here. Now, he designed the entire house himself, not that he had a background in that sort of thing, because he didn't, but Gillette was mechanically inclined. He knew what he wanted in his house, so he made sure he had it. He hired his friends at the Portis Walker Company of Hartford. They were actually the general contractors who had built his family house in Hartford, so he was familiar with them. Construction started in 1914, was basically finished in 1919, although Gillette later modified the building in 1923 to 1926, adding in an in-law apartment suite on the 3rd floor as well as the 2 tower rooms. As a finished product, it was a 14,000 square foot building containing 24 rooms. Came at a cost of $1.1 million, and that was back then. You translate that to today's money, it would be roughly 25 to 30 million at least. Now, he never actually referred to the building as a castle. The proper name for it was the Seven Sister Estate, built, named after the hill it was built on. Although informally, this was the Hadline Stone Heap, the pile of rocks, or the shack. Now, from the outside, it appears to be a medieval castle in ruin, but on the inside, it's rustic, it's cozy, it has all the comforts and conveniences of home. Now, from the very beginning, he had all the modern utilities outfitted in the castle, so in 1919, he moved into a house that had electricity, running water, steam heat, satellite TV, Wi-Fi. Okay, obviously I'm lying about the last two, but he did have everything else. Now, from the time it was built, it was framed in steel, still is, as a matter of fact, and then it was covered up with a facade of local fieldstone and southern white oak that was hand-hewn. Among its most notable features, the castle has 47 unique hand-carved doors, a system of mirrors to spy on guests, a locking liquor cabinet, wood-covered light switches, Tiffany lights, non-Tiffany lights, and a lot of tacky knickknacks and tchotchkes, because he was into that sort of thing. Now, at the time that Gillette wrote the novel, he was semi-retired and certainly enjoying his time at the castle. While at home, he had a modest-sized staff, including his friend, companion, and valet, Taka Osaki. The part of the castle expansion, as I mentioned, was a 3rd floor apartment suite, which Gillette built for and had occupied by his late wife's half-brother, Hal Cohen, and his wife, Allie, lived there. Now, Gillette entertained people in small groups from his little close circle of friends and family. He enjoyed company of his roughly 15 pet cats. In his workshop, he could exercise his mechanical mind, tinker around on little gadgets. In his study, he could write letters to friends, family members, business associates. He could relax in his library. He had a nice recliner where he could just lay back and read any one of his almost 1,200 books. He read all genres, fiction, science, philosophy, history. He really had an eclectic interest. He loved music. He was trained as a musician. Sometimes he would play his piano, or he'd let his electric piano play itself, or allow his friends to entertain him. He had a Vitrola, which is still there, where he could listen to anything from Chopin to Gershwin. In his art gallery, you could take in his private collection of almost 100 seascapes and landscapes. From the balcony over his tower room, in his tower room, you could peer over the surrounding area from over 250 feet above the river. Around his 122-acre estate, he could walk the grounds. He actually created numerous walking trails specifically for that purpose. He could sit by one of his man-made ponds. He could stand on the terrace and do some bird watching. Now, in his earlier days, Will was an avid cyclist. He evolved to become an avid motorcyclist. He was known locally for his daredevilish tendencies, and he actually beat a reckless driving charge in 1925. Now, since he was a child, Gillette knew he loved trains. He always wanted to drive one, so he built one, because that's what you do. He spent $50,000 to put a quarter-scale narrow-gauge railroad on the property. He had 3 miles of track that went all over the property. He had an engine house, 2 stations, several bridges, tunnels, some other platforms. He had 2 engines, one was steam, one was electric. The electric engine is the one that's on display just outside this room. He had several passenger cars. You can see 2 of them right over here. Now, let's actually get to why we're here. Gillette had a lot of time on his hands. He kept the actor's schedule, so he stayed up late. I think he just drank coffee, stayed up late, exercising his mind and doing whatever he wanted. If he slept, he was going to sleep in late because, like I said, it was an actor's schedule. But with the time that he had on his hands, in 1927, he wrote a novel, which is something he had never done before. It was The Astounding Crime on Torrington Road. And if you didn't know that by now, then shame on you. It was published by Harper and Brothers, which was the predecessor of today's HarperCollins Publishing. It was written with the detail and flair for the dramatic as much as any of Gillette's plays. It's thought to be that the inspiration for it came from the murder of Joseph Brown Elwell in 1920. Like Gillette's plays, the novel seemed to do what he did best, which is draw wide appeal and entertain his readers. Locals read the title and they just assume it refers to Torrington, Connecticut, so then they get disappointed to find out it took place outside of Boston. Now, while mystery novels were in their heyday, Gillette broke the mold. He wrote it the way that he wanted to. Those who read the novel can easily glean much about Gillette himself, including his wit, his mechanical mind, and the astute reader can draw many parallels between the novel and Gillette's own life. Now, like I said, I was very fortunate to be asked to provide the introduction for the republishing of the novel. And when I did that, when I wrote out this presentation, I did it with 3 goals. One was to provide Gillette's life story, so we can check that one off the list. Provide some context as to what his life was like when he was living at the castle at the time he wrote the novel, so check. And then the other part was to sort of enlighten people about his legacy. So some people solely associate William Gillette with Sherlock Holmes. A few know him for his role in the history of the American theater. Many know him as the creator of a curious stone castle overlooking the Connecticut River. Most people know him as the inventor of the safety razor, and by now that better not apply to you. That was his cousin, by the way, distant cousin, King Gillette. I think that's hilarious, because, you know, Will had the castle, but King was the razors. King, castle, okay. Now, he deserves the utmost credit, Will, not King, for his professional accolades, for the beautiful property he created. One part of his legacy that's often overlooked is the kind of person he was. So for someone who experienced a fair amount of heartbreak, like I said, his wife died very early. Out of his 5 siblings, only two of them made it into adulthood. So, you know, he experienced a fair amount of loss, but he knew what he wanted in life and he lived it to the fullest. So he lived to be 83 3/4, and in that time, he spent his time doing what he wanted in the way that he wanted to do. The words quirky and eccentric are thrown around a lot. I mean, they'd be accurate, but I mean, they are thrown around a lot. He had a wicked sense of humor, as is evidenced by the castle. A lot of features in there that he designed. When you go up to the 3rd floor, take some time in the library, read the letters that he wrote to friends, family, people he did business with. They're absolutely hilarious. He had a legendary reputation for his well-meaning practical jokes at the expense of others. And despite his celebrity, William Gillette was notoriously private. He evaded the media with great ease. But if you were in his close circle of friends and family, you were treated phenomenally well. He was very kind, he was generous, he was friendly, and he treated you with the utmost respect, whether you were a little neighborhood kid or the President of the United States or someone in between. If you were lucky enough to be in his circle, you were lucky that he shared his joy of life with you. Now, the disadvantage to Gillette's career is that his legacy took place at a different time. So when those who saw him performing on stage passed away, his legacy sort of took a hit. But we're fortunate that the silent film was found back in 2014, so people have the benefit of seeing Gillette perform. Likewise, we're fortunate that his heirs had the mindfulness to sell the castle to the state of Connecticut, where it's been here to preserve his legacy and tell his story for the last 80 years. And then with the Astounding Crime on Torrington Road, it's just another piece of the puzzle. So it provides more insight into Gillette's body of work and to who he was. So we're very fortunate that Tony Lynn and the Friends of Gillette Castle State Park and Brian and Derrick and that they were able to collaborate and republish this great novel so that you can sort of just experience one other aspect of William Gillette. So that's what I got. I think I made it in on time.
So again, thank you for all relating really when this occurred in his life and what was going on, because I think that is important. Thank you all again for coming today. I hope you take the time today to enjoy the grounds, enjoy the castle. Brian, Derrick, Paul will be around for the next